Over the vast waters of the Red Sea, the sun was just beginning to dip beneath the horizon, casting a molten glow over the steel-gray surface of the USS Eisenhower. On board, the tension was palpable. Word had spread that Houthi forces in Yemen were growing bolder, lobbing increasingly sophisticated threats toward U.S. assets, but no one expected them to be reckless enough to strike at a fighter jet. That changed in an instant. Captain Jordan Reyes, call sign Falcon 1, sat in the cockpit of an F-22 Raptor, a machine often misunderstood by America's adversaries. Stealthy, lethal, and bristling with next-gen technology, it was not the aircraft Houthis had expected to tangle with. They likely assumed they were aiming at a slower, more conventional platform, perhaps an F-15 or reconnaissance drone. They were wrong. Falcon 1, you're cleared for combat air patrol, came the voice from the Eisenhower's air boss. Reyes acknowledged, taxied forward, and with a roar, rocketed into the twilight sky. Unbeknownst to him, thousands of miles away, a Houthi command team watched a grainy radar screen blink with signs of movement. Their Russian-supplied tracking software couldn't differentiate between aircraft types with precision. "Target acquired," one operator declared, locking onto the radar echo of what they thought was a vulnerable American jet. The order was simple and swift: fire. Moments later, a Chinese-made missile, an export variant designed to home in on large, slow-flying aircraft, blasted off from the Yemeni coast. But what the Houthis didn't know was that their missile was already at a disadvantage. They had locked onto the ghost of a jet, a stealth fighter engineered to deceive and survive. "Missile warning! Brake right!" came the automated alert in Reyes's helmet. He didn't flinch. The training kicked in, and in one fluid motion the Raptor peeled into a tight, evasive maneuver, deploying flares and decoys as the missile began to arc into its terminal approach. At that altitude, the missile had little time to correct course. It missed. "Missile defeated," Reyes calmly reported back, even as his HUD flickered with threat assessments. But this was no random act. The Houthis had fired a real shot, and not at a drone or slow-flying surveillance platform. They had picked a fight with the most advanced air superiority fighter in the world. Reyes didn't hesitate. He requested permission to retaliate. "Falcon 1, you're green. Take the shot." Locking on to the suspected launch site, Reyes marked the coordinates and released a precision-guided glide bomb from under his fuselage. It fell silent and invisible, slicing through the air toward its mark. 10 seconds later, the Yemeni hillside erupted in a bloom of smoke and flame. Radar trailers, missile launchers, and mobile command tents, gone. Reyes circled once, confirmed the damage, then disappeared into the dusk, silent and untraceable. Back at the command post, confusion turned to panic. The Houthis had made a mistake, and now they were on America's radar in a very different way. Not only had they failed to down a jet, but they had exposed a covert missile battery Iran had covertly supplied. Drones were launched to survey the area. Satellite imagery was requested. Intelligence analysts began piecing together the bigger picture. Reyes returned to the Eisenhower with a calm demeanor. But the implications of what had just happened buzzed through every deck. The U.S. had just been attacked, and not symbolically. An actual attempt had been made to destroy a manned fighter jet. The kind of escalation that prompts headlines, sanctions, and perhaps more. The deck crew saluted as Reyes climbed down from the jet. He nodded, walked past the roaring engines, and into the command center, where senior officers were already forming plans. That night, across briefing rooms in the Pentagon and situation rooms around the world, a simple question echoed. Had the Houthis made a calculated decision, or a catastrophic blunder? High above the shimmering surface of the Red Sea, Captain Jordan Reyes remained in a holding pattern. The Raptor's engines whispered as they cut through the crisp night air, invisible to all but the most sophisticated radars. Below him, the USS Eisenhower maneuvered slowly, its deck bathed in red light, while a team of Navy analysts raced to interpret the aftermath of what had just occurred. Aboard the ship's Combat Information Center, Commander Lee Marston stared at a live feed from a high-altitude MQ-9 drone circling the impact zone in Yemen. The destruction was surgical. One large crater, a field of burning debris, and scattered silhouettes of scorched radar equipment. She turned to the intelligence officer beside her. "Zoom in on that launcher. That's not Houthi-grade gear. That's Iranian SA-15 or a Chinese clone." He nodded grimly. "We're confirming that now. The thermal signature's still hot. Whatever Reyes hit, it just took out their best punch." Meanwhile, Reyes circled once more before making his descent. His mind was clear, but the gravity of the situation hung heavily in the air. His orders had been lawful, precise, and defensive, yet even he knew the broader implications. The Houthis hadn't just fired at a jet, they had poked a sleeping giant. Back in Sana'a, the Houthi command was in chaos. Operators scrambled to assess what had gone wrong. The missile had launched cleanly. The lock-on had seemed secure. And yet, the aircraft had vanished, only to respond with a weapon that struck with devastating precision. "We underestimated the target," one commander growled. "This was no patrol plane. This was something else." Iranian advisors, embedded within the rebel group under covert status, quickly began purging files, dismantling hardware, and preparing disinformation statements. They had not anticipated exposure, especially not through a retaliatory strike that had occurred so swiftly and with such irrefutable accuracy. In Washington, National Security Advisor Helena Pratt reviewed the first packet of images. Her brow furrowed. "Get this to CENTCOM and call state. We need to get ahead of the narrative before Tehran starts spinning denials." Within hours, press briefings were being drafted. Pentagon officials framed the incident as a defensive engagement after an unprovoked missile attack against U.S. aircraft conducting routine security operations. The message was clear. Escalation would not be tolerated, but neither would provocation go unanswered. Meanwhile, Reyes was debriefed in the carrier's ready room. Admiral Trent Walker, commander of the strike group, listened closely as Reyes detailed the missile warning, evasive maneuver, and response. "You kept a cool head," Walker said, folding his arms. "You didn't just save your jet, you saved us a nightmare. If that missile had struck, the fallout would have been enormous. But now..." He turned to the intelligence screen on the wall, where analysts were cross-referencing satellite passes and intercepted communications. "Now we have leverage." Reyes glanced at the screen. "And proof." Outside, preparations intensified. 2 more Raptors were being prepped for air patrol. The USS Laboon, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, launched a new round of SM-6 missiles as a show of force. It was part deterrence, part signal. America was awake, aware, and ready. In Tehran, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard was already scrambling to respond. Leaks had begun to emerge from U.S. media outlets citing anonymous officials who confirmed the presence of Iranian-supplied weapons in Yemen. A drone had captured high-resolution imagery of the serial numbers on a spent missile tube. And worse, intercepted comms revealed a direct Iranian hand in authorizing the missile launch against what they believed was a routine U.S. asset. But the routine had turned out to be a trap. Back on the Eisenhower, Reyes sat alone for a moment beside the Raptor, gazing at its sleek form under the deck lights. He knew this mission would follow him, perhaps not with awards or medals, but with questions. What if he hadn't broken right in time? What if that missile had found its mark? The sky, for all its beauty, had become a battleground. But at least for tonight, he had flown through fire and returned. As the sun began to rise over the water, the U.S. Navy prepared to push forward. The message to its adversaries was unmistakable. You may see a target, but make no mistake. The ghost you fire upon may just fire back. Aboard the Eisenhower, the command deck buzzed with a restrained intensity. Satellite imagery streamed in. Intercept logs rolled across digital displays, and every officer's expression was sharpened by one thing: confirmation. The missile that had nearly brought down a U.S. fighter was no fluke. It wasn't a random strike. It was targeted, deliberate, and unmistakably foreign. Commander Lee Marston stood silently at the head of the situation table, arms crossed, reviewing the latest analysis. The warhead fragments retrieved by drones confirmed Iranian origin, complete with serial coding tied to shipments previously tracked leaving Bandar Abbas. This wasn't just about the Houthis anymore. It was Tehran's fingerprints all over an attack on U.S. air power. What was meant to be a quick, deniable strike had just escalated into an international crisis. Down in the hangar bay, Captain Jordan Reyes stepped out of his flight suit, the adrenaline of the previous night still lingering just beneath the surface. Technicians clustered around his aircraft, what they called the ghost jet, examining every inch of its radar-absorbent skin. It was still intact, a silent testament to the marvel of stealth and the razor-thin margin between survival and catastrophe. Reyes knew he was lucky. That missile had come too close. The difference between evasion and disaster had been measured in milliseconds and degrees. He ran a hand along the jet's wing, recalling the tone in Ghost 2. Voice when the alert hit. The sudden spike of alarm, the instinctive dive, the disorienting flash as the enemy missile spiraled harmlessly away. But this wasn't over. In the briefing room, Admiral Walker addressed the strike group's senior officers. We now have unclassified evidence Iran is directly supplying advanced SAM systems to non-state actors operating in clear violation of international law. We also have eyes on 2 more suspected launch sites in northern Yemen. We're not just going to sit on this. The operation that followed wasn't loud, but it was precise. 3 waves of fighters launched in sequence, EA-18G Growlers for electronic warfare, followed by FA-18 Super Hornets armed with AGM-88 HARM missiles to suppress air defenses. At the center of the formation was Reyes, piloting the same F-22 Raptor that had evaded the initial attack. He wasn't just flying a mission, he was sending a message. As the strike group closed in, the Houthis scrambled to respond. Their early warning systems had been compromised in the first strike. Communications were fragmented. Iranian advisors had vanished into safe houses, unwilling to be caught red-handed. On the ground, Houthi commanders barked contradictory orders, unsure whether to fight or flee. The second American retaliation hit harder than the first. The first target, a hardened radar emplacement embedded into a hillside, was vaporized in seconds. The second, a camouflaged missile transport believed to be days away from operational deployment, erupted into a fireball under a direct JDAM hit. The third site, hidden near a fuel depot, was spared only because its operators abandoned the location hours earlier, spooked by intelligence leaks and drone surveillance. What made the mission unique wasn't just the scale, it was the clarity. Every target had been mapped, verified, and cleared through satellite imaging and human intel. There were no civilians in the blast radius, no collateral, just hardware, infrastructure, and the nerve center of a covert missile network that had just exposed its own position by shooting at the wrong jet. By the time Reyes and the others returned to the carrier, the headlines were already racing ahead of them. News outlets from London to Tokyo were running variations of the same breaking story. Iranian missile strike backfires. U.S. responds with precision raid. Images from drone feeds, some deliberately leaked, showed the smoldering remains of mobile launchers and underground depots. Analysts drew comparisons to past shadow wars, but this one had a sharper edge. The U.S. wasn't merely retaliating, it was broadcasting deterrence. Back in Washington, The National Security Council convened with urgency. While diplomats prepared to walk the tightrope at the UN, defense officials privately acknowledged that the rules of engagement had changed. Tehran had lost plausible deniability. The Houthis had lost the illusion of control. And U.S. forces had demonstrated not just overwhelming capability, but unmatched restraint. Captain Reyes sat through his final debrief late that night, sipping cold coffee as senior intel officers walked him through the aftermath. He listened closely, but his thoughts kept drifting to a single moment, the missile alert tone blaring in his headset, the instant where time seemed to stretch, the desert rushing up beneath him as he dove. The Raptor hadn't just saved him, it had forced the enemy to show their hand. He stood slowly, nodding at the officers as the meeting concluded. They wanted a warning shot, he said quietly. They got one. Outside, on the carrier's flight deck, the stars were beginning to fade as dawn crept over the horizon. Another day would bring new risks, new orders, and new tensions. But tonight, for once, the air was quiet. No missile trails, no firestorms, just the steady hum of the sea, and a ghost that refused to be hit.